Serious, campers, hikers and forest rangers, what is the scariest, strangest or most mysterious things you've experienced in the great outdoors? My first night sleeping in my van while traveling was at an empty free campsite 10 kilometers out of the nearest town. It was all good, made dinner and went to bed early. The next morning I woke up to see another car parked across the campsite, but no one around. All good. I got out of the van opening my slide door and front door once or twice, then shutting them and going around to the back. I then heard yelling, saying if you shut that door one more time I'll freaking kill you. I looked around from behind the van to see an older scrubby looking man storming towards me with a gun pointed at me, still screaming. I said sorry and hid behind the van. He went back to his car and sat with the door open and gun propped up against it. I got into my van and drove off. Pretty shook. Not the nicest thing to happen to me. Some people are freaking crazy. I was mountain biking alone on old logging roads and snowmobile trails one summer a few years ago. I came out of a snowmobile trail onto a gravel mountain road that I was going to take for 3 miles to the next trail. I had been on the gravel road for maybe a half mile when a pickup passed me going in the same direction. A couple of minutes later, it passed me going in the opposite direction. As a female alone in the middle of nowhere, my spidey sense started tingling. A couple of minutes later, he passes me again going the same direction as me again. At this point, I'm going uphill and can't see what's over the crest, but when I get maybe 20 feet from the top, I see the truck stopped in the middle of the road and the guy is standing next to it, looking at me. Now his intentions may have perfectly fine, but his sketchy behavior led me to nope the heck out of there. I turned my bike around, bombed down the hill back to the gated snowmobile trail where I knew he couldn't follow. Better to be safe. I was camping with my girlfriend at the time about a quarter mile off the road in the Tillamook National Forest in Oregon. We were woken up around 2 AM by a very loud bang and the sound of trees falling. I snapped into action immediately, knowing that since we are camped under the trees, that having them falling anywhere near us is dangerous as crap. I tell my girlfriend to get up and out of the tent, and we do. Outside we could still hear trees crashing down, but then I realized it wasn't a danger to us. Put clothes on and headed toward where the sound had come from once it had stopped. We approached the road and saw absolute carnage. 2 large trees were toppled, a semi having hit them. I headed for the cab to check on the driver and he came around the truck screaming, "Where did the car go?" It took me a second to realize that he'd hit a car, and now didn't see it. Unfortunately, I'm the one that found it. It was wedged in front of and partially under the trailer axles, and it was obvious there was nothing we could do. I went back to my girlfriend, who had stopped at the tree line in shock, having noticed a car right away, and told her to drive up the road until she got a cell signal and call 911. She did so while I tried to calm down the trucker. Once he had calmed down a bit, we set out triangles and flares on both sides of the curve and waited for emergency response, which didn't take long considering the remote location. The trucker had broken his wrist and a couple of ribs, as well as bruises and cuts. They deemed the driver of the car fell asleep and didn't even hit the brakes or turn coming into the curve, hitting the trailer axles at about 55 miles per hour. The truck driver swerved to try and avoid them and hit the trees. If he wouldn't have swerved, he would have hit the car head on with his truck and the scene would have been a lot worse. Years later, I'm a truck driver and think about that night a lot. Having had someone basically appear out of nowhere and keep me calm after an accident and do the right things helped me beyond words. I'm sure for that trucker, you were that miracle. Hurt, realizing that he's, by accident, killed someone. He needed someone with a calmer mind to keep him focused. Was hunting with my uncle when I was 11. He was hurt pretty badly when our truck slipped off the road into an icy lake. We were stranded in the mountains for a week until someone happened upon us. Also, during that same trip, I found out that when trees freeze they can explode. Scared the living heck out of me at the time. Did a through hike of the app years ago, and many strange things happened. Like others in this thread, we experienced wild animals, terrain hazards, threatening weather, poisonous snakes, etc. We endured landslides, lightning strikes and flooded swamps where the trail disappeared for miles. We even survived a direct hit from Hurricane Fran, which toppled so many large trees that the trail itself was impassable. Hearing these giants crashing around you at night when you're in a flimsy tent was like waiting for the guillotine to fall. But as others have noted, the most menacing threat always comes from people, especially those that exhibit odd behavior and act crazy. People that appear in the middle of the night and want to share your shelter. Rednecks with weapons who get aggressively drunk and harass female hikers. Worst are the lone hikers who exhibit signs of mental instability, who camp by themselves in isolation but somehow keep showing up at shelters and others' campsites. Weird human behavior, when you know something is not right, and you're in a remote setting, is dreadful on an existential level. You never know when a situation could deteriorate, as when 2 women were murdered at their tent in Shenandoah near the not long before we passed through. The outright scariest thing I can relate actually happened to my friend, another thru hiker on the that year. After 5 months and over 2k miles on the trail, she was within a couple days of finishing on Katahdin when she slipped while ascending Chairback Mountain. She landed on a rock at such an angle that she fractured her humerus bone. The bone snapped in 2 and was protruding through her skin. Her hiking partner stayed with her while another thru hiker who came upon them dropped his gear and heroically ran off trail for many miles before he located and broke into an unoccupied vacation cabin to use the telephone. This was in the pre-cell phone era, in rural Maine which has almost no roads. Had it not been for this man, who managed to call in a medevac helicopter and then go back and move her off the mountain to an evacuation location, she would have lost her arm for sure. But thanks to the chopper they got her into emergency surgery just in time. Her friend summited Katahdin for both of them a few days later. A year and a half back my wife and I were car camping boondocking outside of Bryce Canyon in the federal lands. It was a rainy day, so we just grabbed dinner at a Subway, and then played cards while it rained in the back of the car. We fell asleep pretty early, 9ish, because when it gets dark and there's no light, it just puts you to sleep. We woke up to this rustling. First my wife, then me. At first I thought it was just the wind in the trees, after all it had been storming when we'd fallen asleep, but it wasn't. It was wolves. It was a whole pack of wolves, and they'd completely surrounded our car. Now bear in mind that we were in a big, heavy-duty SUV, and there was no way they were getting in, but at like 3 in the morning, being surrounded by wolves is pretty terrifying. As a result, we both kind of freaked out, turned on the dome lights, then the car lights, then the roof-mounted lights, which didn't scare them off. It just showed us how many freaking wolves there were. A few years ago my brother, and my cousin were hiking the for a week. We did sections every year. We were sleeping in one of the open cabins and we all woke up to an owl hunting mice in the cabin. It was very confusing and terrifying until we found out it was an owl. That's awesome. Not really mysterious, but the scariest was a small pack of wolves who I thought were gonna eat me. I was walking to my car when I came across them and one started growling. Scared the crap out of me at the time. My wife and I decided we would sleep in a shelter on the after a long 14-mile hike. We were having dinner with another couple who was camping down the trail a bit around sundown when a man came into the shelter. He turned us down and joining us for dinner and had us sitting on the edge of the shelter watching us. Nightfall came and it was time for bed. My wife and I were the only other people in the shelter that night and tried to make small talk before going to bed. The man finally communicated with us a little as he set up the last of his gear and crawled into his bed, turning off his light. Around 11:30 the man opens his pack and proceeds to pull out some device and open and close it for 30 minutes. The problem is the noise was the distinct noise of a pocket knife. Around 12 the man goes out without a headlamp to use the bathroom. At this point I try to place my wife's hand on the knife beside my pillow because I know she will be awake and terrified as well. The man comes back in the shelter and just stands by his sleeping bag for the next 20 minutes while we lay perfectly still, my back facing him. Then out of nowhere I hear him begin to walk towards us. I panicked and let go of my wife's hand I had been holding and turned over towards him pretending to be startled. I honestly thought I was about to have to fight for my wife's life, not even mentioning my own. The man scurried back to his bag 15 feet away and zipped it up. I am still not sure of his intent to this day and it bothers me the most. I stayed awake for the rest of the night and would occasionally make noises to make him realize I was awake. At 4:30 a horse, common in this section of the Grayson Highlands, tried to get in the shelter with us and my wife feigned interest in him to make an excuse to get up. I have never had a longer hike than the 7-mile hike out the next day. Here's the kicker. Before we parted ways that morning, the man apologized to my wife if he kept her awake. That is honestly such a terrifying story. I'm just happy you guys made it through the experience alive and well. Ugh. Gave me the shivers. I was on a 5-day backpacking trip in the Bob Marshall Wilderness in western Montana. The area is huge with hundreds of trails and has a portion of the Continental Divide Trail running through its boundaries. While it's a classic Montana hiking spot, the large area and number of trails makes it so you can go a couple of days without running into someone. We were on our 3rd night of camping, 30 miles into an area near a massive limestone cliff known as the Chinese Wall. All was going well on the trip and myself and my 2 girlfriends felt pretty safe out there, as we had no reason to feel otherwise. We had bear spray with us and are all experienced hikers. Anyways, we go to bed in one tent, no rain flap on, so you could see in and out of the tent clearly. I woke up around 4 AM to the noise of someone walking around outside the tent. I was sleeping on an outer side of the tent and could see his figure clearly in the moonlight. He walked around for 10 minutes not really doing anything but staring at the ground. Meanwhile, my friends are asleep and I am absolutely frozen with fear. I could not move. I had my bear spray next to my sleeping bag and slowly pulled it close to me, in case this dude was going to do something crazy. I thought he may have been lost, or looking for his friends, but he had no pack on, and was wearing shorts and a long sleeve, but still light shirt. In the middle of the cold night, something was off for sure. The next thing I know, he is crouched next to our tent on my side, literally inches away from my body, staring in at my sleeping friends and me. I gripped that bear spray so tight and took off the safety, ready to straight up blind this guy, and now that I think of it, probably also myself. He lingered for a while. It felt like forever. I could hear his breath hitting the screen of the tent. I can still picture his glasses and sharp, straight nose. About 40 years old. Eventually he gets up and stays at our campsite for a while. He didn't touch our packs or anything. He just stood there. I decided after I could no longer see him or hear him, to get out of the tent with my bear spray and make it loud and clear that I was not afraid to royally frick him up. Got back in the tent and didn't sleep another second. In the morning I told my friends about what happened and they of course were freaked out. But we pushed on to the Chinese Wall, which was beautiful, and ended up having a great trip all things considered. We for sure were watching our backs the last couple of nights though. Another scary part of this story is that my bear spray actually ended up being defective. The nozzle where the spray comes out was left out in manufacturing, but I did get some free bear spray out of this. Frick that creepy dude, whoever he was, 30 miles into a wilderness area with no gear, peeping into tents. Humans are the scariest things in the woods, 100%, not a cute joke, just a fact. When I was young in Boy Scouts, my tent mate and I were asleep and I kept feeling something push through the liner of the tent and I heard and felt a sniffing sound and hot breath on me. I would turn on my flashlight and try to see if I could see the silhouette of any creature because I could hear leaves and sticks crunching around us. Every time I turned the light on and sat up, the noise would stop. The minute I shut my flashlight off, the sound would begin again. This went on for an hour or so. Finally I was so freaked I told my buddy, something is out there dude. He shrugs me off and a few hours later I hear him unzip the tent to take a leak. The next thing I know I hear snarling and him falling backwards into our tent, still peeing. And he screams Wolf. Our fellow scouts and troop leaders yelled and banged pots and pans together, causing the Wolf to scamper away. In the morning Wolf tracks surrounded all of our tents and the scout camp counselors and employees said they had been having sightings. Really intense experience and I still remember the fear. Lesson is, if you're ever camping and someone in the group tells you there is something pacing outside, hold your pee until morning. And here I thought my bear biting someone on the butt through his tent story was scary. Boy was I wrong. Flipped our kayak in the North Fork of the Flathead River in Montana some years ago. Right after me and my dad got our heads above water we looked downstream and there was an absolutely massive log jam. Talking 100 trees perhaps. These things can suck you under and in the spring runoff if you get caught under there you're definitely dead. Anyways, obviously that didn't happen but the kayak did get sucked under. As we were walking back down the river we found bare human footprints in the sand by the river. We followed them a couple hundred feet into the forest and found an impressively made lean-to made of branches and some vegetation with dried mud used as a type of mortar. Needlessly to say we hightailed it the frick out of there. You probably stumbled on the primitive technology guy. Been to Indonesia this summer. We hired a ranger to guide us through the jungle. During the walk, he sees a fresh panther poo, and after a few minutes we have to hide from the panther itself. Was cool. I almost made a fresh poo myself. Considering that all the big cats in Indonesia are critically endangered, you were very lucky encountering one, especially since it didn't eat you. I used to be a tree planter in Alberta and lived in a tent beside a creek in the woods for 2 months. Had a few crazy experiences. This creek was the watering hole for all sorts of animals that came right up to my tent at night. I was always afraid to look, but judging by the sounds I heard I had wolves, coyotes, large hooved animals and bears. One night I heard the sound of rocks being thrown in the creek. I learned years later this is a tray of Sasquatch. Probably not Sasquatch, but maybe. One night we had a crazy rainstorm come through and turn the creek into a river. I discovered this in the middle of the night when water was rushing into my tent. I managed to get out just in time and drag my tent up the banks before I was swept away. Went camping at the local forest preserve and had to take a crap in the middle of the night. While I was crapping, these two raccoons started fighting, without warning other than a few chitters, and throwing each other into the side of the cabo. Thank God I was already on the pot because due to the echo, it sounded like two of our local coyotes fighting, and I would have definitely crapped whatever pants I was wearing otherwise. Took the first opening I had to sprint out of there because I didn't want those angry trash pandas to turn their attention towards me. Went back in the morning to find some nice claw marks and blood stains on the outside walls. We were the creepers of the incident. Prescott AZ, October 2015. We had set up at our regular spot and we were all pretty excited because we managed to be the only people in the area for miles. We drank, shared stories and had a good time into the night. Around 11:30 or so, a truck rolls past a little too slowly to just be out for a night drive. Once they got past us, they sped up and off into the darkness. 45 minutes later the truck returns, slows by our sight, and speeds off again. Weird, maybe they're looking for friends camping in the area, but we knew no one else was around. About 1:30 rolls around and wouldn't you know it, same truck back again, but this time they stop on the road. In our infinite wisdom, we decided to shut our lights off on a count of 3. 1, 2, 3, lights out, and just as luck would have it, a quick gust blew out our fire at the same time. Apparently, the occupants of the truck did not appreciate the theatrics and took off like a bat out of heck. Needless to say, we did not have visitors for the rest of the night. You have been visited by the wisdom pupper type. Study well pupper or you will fail your next text at school. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.